to do right here is go back. Way back. Back into time.
We can rebuild him. We have the technology.
Celebrating 20 years of New England Championship Wrestling. This is the ReGeneration Podcast.
And now, here are your hosts, Sheldon Goldberg, Joe Matarazzo, and Kevin Castro.
Welcome, everyone, to another edition of the NECW ReGeneration Podcast, celebrating 20 years of New England Championship Wrestling. I'm Sheldon Goldberg, here as always with Joe Matarazzo.
Hello, folks.
And Kevin Castro.
Hey, guys.
We got a very special guest this week. I'm excited about this because we kind of reconnected about a year or two ago after not really speaking to each other for a very long period of time. Before there was NECW, there was NWA New England and the Century Wrestling Alliance. And one of the top stars for NWA New England and the Century Wrestling Alliance is our guest this week, who I am so proud of because he was not only a great wrestler and a former NWA World Tag Team Champion, but he is a published author and someone who has lived an incredible life and has committed the tale in the form of a book, and that is my friend, Brendan Higgins, a.k.a. better known as Knuckles Nelson. Welcome, welcome, welcome. If I had a red carpet, it would be rolled out right now.
Sheldon, that was quite an introduction, and you know I love you, brother, and I appreciate everything you've done for me, especially recently in the last few months. It took me a while, but I'm finally here in New England Championship Wrestling.
Well, and we're glad you are. So, it's funny. The wrestling business, independent wrestling anyway, is one of the funniest businesses in the world because you can work very closely with people and not know their real names, not know anything about them, not know what they do outside of the once or twice a month that you see them. And you just published a book called Waking Up, From the Wrestling Ring to the Yoga Mat, and it's pretty much your tale of struggle and redemption, and I found it to be a fascinating book. Fascinating maybe especially for me because, we worked together for a while. We knew each other. I wouldn't say that we were, we hung out all the time or whatever. We weren't friends really outside of wrestling, although we were friendly at the time. But it's funny, you don't know what people go through. You don't know their struggles. So it was interesting to read this, and even more interesting to see that you have the courage, and it does take courage to lay your life out in print. So I congratulate you on this book. I'll tell you, it's a massive accomplishment. And I urge people to get it, especially, everybody can identify with somebody like you. Everybody knows somebody who has had a similar story, perhaps not the wrestling part of it, but, the struggle to find themselves and so forth as you have. So tell us a little bit about how you got to write the book. How did you make that decision?
The first thing I want to say, it was very important for me to get that book into your hands because I really wanted to know what you thought about it because we lived through a lot of this stuff together, especially during the times that you alluded to earlier, the 90s, during the Century Wrestling Alliance and the National Wrestling Alliance days, and those were really fun, exciting times for me. And as years went on, years after that, I retired from wrestling in 2003, permanently from everything, from wrestling, training, promoting, all that stuff. I literally walked away from it, and it was many years until I decided to write this book, and it really just poured out of me. It was something that I feel was channeled through me, to be honest with you, because I wrote almost 400 pages in a matter of a week. And then it was refining it. Then it was adding to it. I hate the word memoirs, but it's really my memoirs. And I start off in 2018 when I decided to jump on my Harley Davidson and drive deep into the mountains of Virginia to look up my childhood hero, Handsome Jimmy, the Boogie Woogie Man Valiant, and hopefully get to spend some time with him. And I did. And in the book itself, I actually start the book driving down there on my motorcycle. Then I go back in time to my breaking into wrestling and how that all went, and work my way back up to present day. And I'm also being told that the book is extremely cinematic, and I have a lot of hopes that it could also be made into a movie at some point.
And you document your travels to Japan and Australia, lots of places. Wow. You're a well-traveled individual.
The thing that I would say the most about this book is that I told the truth. And there were a lot of years that I lived in addiction, drugs and alcohol, and I did not tell the truth. I lived a complete lie. And when I finally got sober many, many years ago, I still was struggling with things like anger and rage and being dishonest and not really finding, any inner peace. And that's where the journey really began. And I can say that the book has a very happy ending, and I've been sober for almost 20 years now, and so feel free to ask me anything, because I found the more honest I am, the more people are interested in hearing what I have to say.
Well, that's important. As I say, writing a book, a memoir, is the ultimate act of bravery, because you're laying yourself out for the public to see. That's a very hard thing to do. So, again, my hat is off to you. You are a brave man, and especially to tackle your faults, lay them out in the open, and say, this is my path to getting past them. But I want to talk about your wrestling career, because this is a wrestling podcast. We talk about wrestling. We talk about New England Championship Wrestling. And indirectly, you had a big part to play in what led up to New England Championship Wrestling. And how did you get started? What got you into wrestling, apart from being interested in it as a kid?
It really started there. My earliest television memories is wrestling, is the WWF in the in the mid to late 70s, and then, world-class wrestling after that. And I was such a massive fan that it got so bad I had to start doing it. I just had to, and I ended up finding a local glorified backyard organization in Rhode Island. I had already been subscribing to the Observer and the Torch, and I had a little bit of knowledge about wrestling. And when I went to this wrestling group that I found in Rhode Island, I knew that no one was interested in learning the art of pro wrestling like I was. And they had a show one night, and it was there that I met a gentleman by the name of Brutal Bob Evans, who just happened to be there scouting some talent. And he approached me and my friend Clint Rampage after the match that we had. He said, I think you guys are absolutely crazy. He said, but I think if you really want to become pro wrestlers, we have a school in Freetown, Massachusetts. It was just starting out. It was called Coastal Pro Wrestling. And it was a guy by the name of Frank Castahana and his son Nick, who was Nick Steele, and Brian Brieger and Sky King and the Royal Brothers and a bunch of guys that were training there. And they had all branched off from Yankee Pro Wrestling and started this promotion on the Seacoast here. And that's where I learned the art of pro wrestling. And I was trained primarily by Bob, Brian, and Nick. And after that, I just was in the right place at the right time a lot of times. And obviously, once I met Tony, everything just went completely to the next level.
You mentioned Nick Steele. We're going to take a look at a match involving Nick Steele. That's our bonus match. You're going to see that a little bit later, and we'll talk about it coming up. So you met Tony when? Tony Rumble we're talking about.
The first time I met, I was well aware of who Tony was from watching ICW. I mean, I was so obsessed with wrestling. If it was ICW, Bedlam from Boston, I don't care what it was. Any wrestling that came on television, I was completely obsessed with watching it. And so I knew who he was. And I had been wrestling on the low-level independents, where there would be, luckily, if there were 20, 25 people in the crowd, families and friends of the wrestlers. And I showed up in Hanover, Massachusetts at a show that Tony was doing at Hanover High School. And I remember I went by myself. I got there early and brought my gear trying to get on the show. The first person that I encountered in the locker room there was Hacksaw Jim Duggan, then King Kong Bundy, then Atlas and Tito Santana. And this was a whole different ball game. And I told Tony that I had my gear with me if he wanted to use me. And he said, great, you can wrestle me tonight. And I did. And I worked with Tony. And there was probably 2,000 people there. The place was completely banged out to the rafters. It was a whole different experience for me. Tony was brutal with me in the ring. He didn't mean to be, but he reversed me out of the corner and gave me an elbow right into my teeth. And I mean, I was wearing a mask, and the mask filled up with blood. And in the locker room after I took the mask off, and I was a bloody mess, and Atlas walked up to me, and he got real close to my face, and he said, that's good for the business, kid. Now clean up your face and go tell Tony Rumble thank you for being in the ring with him and being on his show. And that's exactly what I did. I did exactly what I was told, and I was on every one of Tony's shows after that up until the day he passed away.
It's funny you mentioned that, because Tony's first match was it against Abdullah the Butcher or was it against Bruiser Brody?
I think it was Brody.
Yeah, it was Brody, and Brody broke his jaw.
That's insane,
right.
man.
Yeah.
That was with the handshake.
Exactly. You got the same introduction. You got the same introduction to wrestling that he got back in the day. So
Pretty sure you can find that match on YouTube too, Brody and Tony Rumble.
Oh my God!
Wow.
I'll have to check that out. It's funny. I still find it hard to watch anything of Tony's because I loved him so much and I miss him so much. That's a passing that I never 100% got over. I find it hard to watch. He was taken from us way too soon. He died in November of 1999. Died of a massive heart attack. It was totally unexpected. Although, in talking to his cousin Paul Zine and other people that were close to him, Tony's parents both died young, so there was a history of heart disease in the family. And of course, we didn't know that because it never came up. We never discussed things like that. Although I did discuss a lot of personal things with Tony. I remember, in fact, one day we were driving around Roslindale, which is where I live, and he grew up in Roslindale. We grew up like less than a mile apart from each other and didn't meet until like 1989 or 1990 in New York at a wrestling convention, of all things, and we became fast friends right after that. But we went to the cemetery where his parents are buried because it was fairly close to where I live, and I was kind of hanging back as he stopped and looked at the headstones and all that, and we're looking around at some of the other headstones and the dates that people had passed away, like 1950 and 1942 and whatnot. And he said, he says, we're just like grains of sand on a beach. He goes, who comes to see these people? Look at the years that they passed away. He always talked about his mortality, and I didn't think anything of it because, you're talking to somebody and you don't think anything's up. But his was a passing that I never really truly got over.
I think that's true for a lot of us, Sheldon. I mean, first of all, thank you for you just took me there to that cemetery and that story and just the kind of things that would have come out of his mouth on that walk and that in there. And I was in such shock when he died. It was just so unexpected. There's a part of me that thinks Tony died of a broken heart because of what was happening behind the scenes, like with the sponsorship for WNDS and it falling through, and there were some things going on behind the scenes that I think were tough for all of us to take because we were on our way. You can see over my shoulder this poster here from WNDS, and when things kind of they came to an abrupt halt. I'm pretty sure if he had lived, he would have regrouped and more things would have happened. But obviously, the landscape for wrestling in New England changed forever. And I would just want to say quickly, if I promoted some shows, several other people did, but if anyone carried on Tony's vision and took it to the next level, it was definitely you in New England Championship Wrestling. I followed it over the years, and I was just always so impressed with the quality of television and wrestlers and the announce teams and everything about it. It was like what you were the person that should have taken over NWA New England, but that's just my opinion.
I appreciate you saying that. Thank you so much.
At the time, I didn't behave that way at the time, and I was really hard on you. But I'm glad I get this opportunity to say this now because you are a true Boston bad boy, and you are a brilliant wrestling mind. And I was too full of myself to even realize it back then. Like I was an in-ring wrestler. I had no interest in doing all that other stuff, And but you were really the person that should have done it.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. It was such a shock to everyone. I don't think anybody had it. There was nobody had a plan B. It was something that nobody expected would happen. Nobody expected the guy was going to drop dead at the age of 43. I mean, who thinks that? So we did what we did. It all worked out the way it was supposed to work out, I suppose. If I could change one thing, I would erase every single minute of what I've done if I could have Tony back. Unfortunately, I can't. So we just have to do what we do. But thank you so much for saying that. Yoga. Let's talk about yoga. How did you get from wrestling to yoga?
Well, I think when people think of professional wrestling and yoga, they obviously think of DDP, and I don't have any aspirations to market a brand, or I just practice yoga. I am totally impressed with everything that he's done. I thought the movie that he did was amazing, and I would guess that our journeys as yogis, as practicing yoga, would probably be very similar. But I found yoga in 2014 when I was looking for an activity to replace weightlifting. In the years and decades, I had like a 30-year run in the gym, and I was just not feeling it anymore. And a local yoga studio opened up right here in town where I live in Rhode Island, in North Kingstown, called Rhode Island Power Yoga. And I went to my first class there in 2014, and I knew immediately that this was the replacement for it. It's really the physical practice is what it is, but it's really the mindfulness. And I had mentioned earlier that I've struggled with. I used to struggle. The reason I can talk about all these things like a bad temper and rage and suicidal thoughts and drug and alcohol problems is because I'm on the other side of it now, and I'm free from it all. And I'm not anti-alcohol or anti-drug. I just know it's a good idea that I don't do that stuff anymore in my life. And when I found yoga, I was really hoping that it was going to help me with things like road rage and like getting pissed off in traffic and things that were still bothering me. I was like, things have changed now. You get arrested for things like that, and I didn't want to have anything like that happen to me. Sure. And I was wondering, why am I getting so pissed off over such minor things, like someone beeping their horn at me? But it was just the way I was, it's just part of my story. So I started practicing yoga, and I never looked back. And then when I started going on these trips, like even before I went down to see Boogie in Virginia, I took a motorcycle trip to Key West, Florida from Rhode Island, and I stopped at yoga studios all the way down the East Coast and all the way back up. I practiced yoga in Australia, all over New England, and my yoga home is New England Power Yoga, and to this day, I was there tonight. I just came from a class right now. It's something that really it helps me to stay centered and to have some inner peace.
Now, it wasn't a matter of you were injured and it was a different way of working out, different way of getting that physical activity. Because in DDP's case, that's what happened to him.
Right.
He had injuries and needed a different way to work out that would replace weightlifting. That wasn't the case for you?
Someone suggested to me, there's a new yoga studio in town. Do you want to go check out a class? And I did. And they never went back. It was a one-time deal for my friend that went. I was going 6-7 times a week for years. And it's heated power yoga. The room's over 100 degrees. I'm actually in better shape now than I was when I was wrestling. And the physical challenge, we do like 1 million push-ups in the class. It's not what people think. There's not a lot of meditation. There's not a lot of. It's power yoga. It's for people with type A. I look around me, and it's all people with type A personalities, and very similar to myself. And so it was really more wanting to stay in shape, but learning that there's a whole lot more to it than the physical practice. The physical practice is really just a small part of it.
Yeah, Dallas Page would try everything to get me into yoga, and I steadfastly resisted because I have furniture that's more athletic than I am, so that's how that goes.
I highly recommend it to everyone.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the style of yoga that he does, the DDP yoga, is it's an offshoot of vinyasa that I do. It's very similar to what I do. He's he's in unbelievable shape for a guy in his 60s.
Yeah, absolutely. So you were at one time one half of the NWA World Tag Team Champions. Let's talk about that, because that was a pretty cool deal for our company. You and Eric Sprasia, and then you and Rick Fuller very briefly, were and you and Duke Staunton. Isn't that correct? We're the NWA World Tag Team Champions. I'll let you recount that, because that was cool.
What I remember most about that was finding out that the belts were coming to NWA New England, and I was going to be one of the lucky ones to be a part of all of this thing with Sprasia. And we really weren't a very good team when we started out. We were two singles wrestlers. He had a lot of experience as a tag team wrestler with Phil Apollo. They were a really good team. But me and Eric were not gelling in the beginning. But when we, I look back on these situations. I mean, whether it was Jim Cornette or Kevin Sullivan or Howard Brody, like the people that were around back then, they were all, these are all heavy hitters in wrestling, and I was again in the right place at the right time. So Eric and I quickly realized we needed some pointers. So we went up to Killer Kowalski's school, and Walter, was very welcoming, and he helped us hone our skills as tag team wrestlers. And then we started going to Japan for Wally Yamaguchi through his brother Shun, and we were wrestling every night over there. And then we were now we're starting to like gel as a team, and we got it together pretty good there until Eric retired from wrestling.
That was kind of an abrupt thing. He got a union job, and he had family issues, and just wanted to get out and live a regular life.
Well, I write about this in my book. I didn't really understand it at the time because wrestling was all I did. I didn't have a job. I didn't have a mortgage. I was like, there were nights when I was wrestling and I needed the money to eat. Like that wrestling was what I did. And so when we were in Japan one night, and we got off the plane in Boston, and he never really said anything to me about it. And I found out from Tony the next day when we were supposed to be going the very next day down to Dallas, Texas, which is a trip I believe you went on with us.
Yes, I did.
And that's when everything changed. And he said, Eric's done. He's not going to be. And I called him, and he told me he said I'm very sorry, but I had like I said I understand it more now. I understand that he had a family and a child and a mortgage, and he had to do what he had to do. But we carried on as best we could. But it was never really the same after that. Like Rick Fuller was just someone to transition over to Duke Stoltman. But the best part about all of that era to me was the feud we had with Public Enemy.
Right.
We got to work with Rocco Rock and Johnny Grunge, and they also helped us improve as a tag team. But the thing that used to really piss me off about wrestling them was we would wrestle them on some independent show, and then they would go and do our moves on Monday Nitro the following Monday. steal our moves.
Well, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. Unless they take your moves and then it's theft.
Yeah, we'd be telling them in the locker, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, and they'd be like, oh, yeah, that's good. And then we'd see them do it on TV the following week. So.
I got to fill in some of the blanks on that whole situation with the NWA World Tag Team titles. When NWA New England was, of course, part of the NWA, and they wanted to bicycle the tag team titles to different companies. Dan Severn was the world champion, and he was a great world champion because he was just an impressive guy. UFC champion, legit as legit ever gets. When he would come to a show, he'd show up with all of his belts and, shake hands with the people and sign autographs and kiss babies and whatever. And he was didn't matter who you put him in with. You could put him in with a broomstick, and people would say, wow, there's Dan Severn. He's a big star, and he's Scream World Champion. But the tag team titles were something that the NWA promoters would fight over. Everybody wanted their team to be the World Tag Team Champions. Tony, because of his experience in ICW, and because he really believed at the time, back in those days in wrestling magazines, had very good relationships with magazine people. Everyone from Shun Yamaguchi, who worked at the time for Gong magazine in Japan, to Bill Apter, everybody knows the Apter mags and so forth, and George Napolitano, who was a photographer and editor for a bunch of wrestling magazines. So Tony had great relationships because of his work in ICW with all these people. And so Tony and I petitioned Howard Brody, who was then the president of the NWA, give us the tag team titles because we'll do something with them. We'll get them in the magazines. We'll do things that get them exposed. And one of the things that just happened to happen was Shun Yamaguchi's brother Wally, who later went on to manage Kaientai in WWE. Wally, who was kind of a power broker in Japan, would set up these independent tours for different companies. Some of them were kind of fly-by-night, and some of them were not so fly-by-night. But anyway, Wally had come to us and said, hey, we're looking for some people to go to Japan. And I said to Shun, well, Jesus, if we have the NWA World Tag Team titles, book the champions. Book the Brotherhood. It'll be a big deal. If you can't get, WWF names at the time, bring over the NWA World Tag Team Champions. That means something in Japan. And that's what happened. So you guys were the recipients of that, along with some others from our group. What ended up happening, because the titles were fought over by some of the other promoters, came time that the belts had to be dropped. Tony really didn't want to drop the titles to anybody at the time, because none of them were really promoters that had any kind of a presence in the industry or any kind of connections. Under his auspices, the publicity that he could get with you guys in the Public Enemy, we did a one-night title change with the Public Enemy. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yes, we did.
That the Public Enemy had the titles they were in WCW at the time. The Public Enemy had the NWA titles for one night or whatever. That was a big deal. That was a newsworthy deal. So working with us got the NWA publicity that it could not have gotten with any of those other promoters. So the time came that we had to switch the belts to a team in Texas working out of the NWA Dallas office called Team Extreme. Chris Germany and what's the other guy's name?
Kit Carson.
Kit Carson, yes. Yes, Chris Germany I hear from every now and then. But
nice
they were nice guys, really good people. And they had a big show at the Bronco Bowl in Dallas, which was like a big entertainment complex, a bowling alley and an arena and a bunch of other stuff. We sent the Brotherhood down there. I went along on the trip to drop the titles. And I ended up actually doing commentary on that match for their TV show. But it was a political deal. We had to... And, of course, Eric decides to back out of wrestling just before that. So now we're stuck. Tony, if the titles didn't change hands, Tony would have had to pay like a fine because we didn't want to get rid of him. Tony would kind of balked at the idea that his guys weren't going to be the champions anymore because we were doing things with the titles. We had sent them to Japan. We had done all these things. We got to go, and now Eric all of a sudden decides he's got a union job. He's out of the business. So Tony got Rick Fuller, and you couldn't get away with this now. But they go to the airport, and Rick Fuller tells him his name is Eric Sprasia, and it's his wrestling name.
No way.
So he managed to get on the plane. You could never do that today.
Wow.
Yeah. So
Sheldon, when you mentioned, I just want to piggyback on a couple of things you just said.
Sure.
When you said that bringing the NWA World Tag Team titles to Boston, to NWA New England, because we were going to do some things with them, is exactly what we did. I could show you several wrestling magazines with us in them. We were ranked higher than the Steiner brothers. We were also, I have a stack of wrestling magazines where we're in the top 10 consistently every month. During that time period, that went away after we dropped the belts. And also, when we went to Japan, the NWA name, and everybody knows it's no secret, had taken a downward spiral in the 90s, especially after WCW left the NWA. Right. And it was, some people called it a glorified independent. I don't think that was fair. But when we went to Japan, the NWA name still had great respect. We went over there and we were treated very differently in Japan than we were here. Like I remember being with the Headbangers at a show somewhere, and they were calling them the nothing titles. The NWA is not anything anymore, even though they just had them just before we had them. Right. And but the way we were treated in Japan was very unexpected to me because here in New England and we were going all over the place. We were going on these little groups. We were defending the belts consistently in different cities around the country. And I'm pretty sure after we did finally drop those belts in Charlotte, North Carolina, that didn't happen until maybe TNA started up or something.
You're right.
Something gave it a jump start. But when someone said what happens to the NWA belts now after we dropped them, and we saw what happened to them, and like I said, I like Team Extreme, and I had a great time down there in Dallas, but it wasn't you guys made some promises and then kept them.
Right. Tony was able to do things because of his relationships and his stroke in the business that none of the other promoters in the NWA could do. When WCW got out of the NWA, what was left was a bunch of independent promoters. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It was just a different thing it took a different shape because of the times. But a lot of those promoters were guys that just had $500 to join the NWA. They weren't people who were in the business or had a background in the business. They were people who wanted to be in the business, and for $500 they could say they were in the business. Tony was, it's hard for people outside of it to understand how important he was. He had a lot of stroke. He had a lot of relationships. During the late 90s, when Jim Cornette was up here and he was appearing on our shows on a regular basis, Kevin Sullivan would come up on a regular basis. I mean, that was a big deal. The center of the business was right here. How many guys? You got to work WCW shots. You got to work WWF shots. I mean, this was a result of that relationship. It wasn't, if you worked for some other NWA Saskatchewan or NWA East Left Elbow, that wouldn't have happened for you.
No, and I also know from traveling around to some of those East Elbow promotions, the rings that we were working in, and it was definitely a throwback to the olden days of going to these small towns. But one more quick Tony Rumble story, if I may. I remember I was the NWA New England champion when he passed away, and just prior to that, I was saying to Tony, we should start calling the NWA New England champion just the NWA champion. And let's start this thing where we'll be claiming that that this belt is the world title and we're the NWA champion. And he looked at me and he said, "I love it." And we started doing that towards the very end. He was calling me the NWA champion, and him and Howard, I think, were going back and forth. Howard didn't care for that, but it was beautiful. And if I think it would have been something that could have even gotten a replica belt of the NWA and put that on the NWA champion.
I had one. Here's the story. I don't know if you remember this. When we had Ogawa at Good Times, Naoya Ogawa, a Japanese guy who was a silver medalist in judo, was the NWA world champion. And he had a trip over here. He made a number of shots, and a couple of them were for us. One of them was at Good Time Emporium, and I had the foresight, working with our friend Shun Yamaguchi, I had posters made that were partly in Japanese. And we put them up in places around Cambridge where there were Japanese markets. There's a lot of big Japanese population that's in Cambridge because of MIT and Harvard and so forth. A lot of Japanese students and Japanese people were living in that area. There was a Japanese bookstore out there, a number of Japanese markets in Porter Square. So I had the foresight to go put these posters up in all these places. And there were about like 30 or 40 Japanese people that came to Good Time Emporium looking to meet Ogawa, who in Japan was like a national hero. So the plane is late. Ogawa doesn't make the show until it's over. So we told the people who were there to see him to wait. So he comes in, one of the guys that he trains with and so forth, and I forget who else was with him. So he comes in, and he doesn't have the belt. He won't take it out of his luggage. I happen to have a replica. We also happen to have Peter McNeely. Remember Peter McNeely, the tomato can that Mike Tyson knocked out in 10 seconds or whatever? Right, 96, right.
I could have won a lot of money.
He was there at Good Times that day. So we did a photo op with Ogawa and Peter McNeely. Ogawa's holding my replica belt, okay? So he's holding the belt, and I'm holding McNeely back from, they're facing off against each other. And the picture, which Shun took, was in the sports page of every major newspaper and magazine in Japan. The picture of, are these two guys going to fight? The guy that Tyson knocked out and Ogawa. That was like a big deal. Funny as that sounds. But those were the kinds of things.
Yesterday.
Yeah, those were the kinds of things that we would do. That nobody else would do that. Nobody else was in the same universe as that. So a lot of fond memories.
All those shows, we were involved with the Patriots, former Patriots players like Fred Smirlis and Steve Nelson, and you mentioned McNeely, and you mentioned it was just a unique. And I might be saying this because I was there, and but I still think that when you had Kevin Sullivan and Jim Cornette in locker rooms promoting people on the spot to the next level of wrestling, myself included. I don't know if there's another independent in that time period that could claim that. None.
Other than Cornette was pretty tight with Dennis Corluzzo in New Jersey, and we had some of their talent on our shows. People like Devin Storm and Ace Darling, Bill DeMott, who was wrestling at the time as Crash the Terminator. He was going to Japan with
Tom Brandy.
Tom Brandy, yep. A lot of those guys ended up in WWF as it was then, and this was we were in that orbit, which was really kind of pretty amazing at the time.
Well, I've told the story many times, and you probably know it as well. Tony called me up one day in 1996 and told me that I got you booked on a show, and it's in New Jersey. So we're driving down in the car, him and Scott Dickinson. He said it's the Eddie Gilbert Memorial Show, and I was like, what? And he said, I would never could have gotten myself booked on that show. And so we get there, and there's Dory Funk and Abby and Doug Gilbert and Lawler and all these people, and through the crowd, and there had to have been 50 wrestlers that were not booked on the show that night. And Jim Cornette came walking through the crowd, and he said, "Tony Rumble, you old dog, can you book this cluster F for us tonight?" And I knew I was with the right person right at that moment. Those kind of situations just kept happening and happening and happening because I never would have been on that show. Some guy in New England with that, no one really knew. But he kept pushing me and pushing me and pushing me and putting me in matches against people like Atlas and Snuka and Tito Santana. And I'm knocking these guys out with brass knuckles. The whole thing was Tony's idea. I remember them not being happy about it. Atlas was not happy about losing to me.
I'm enjoying this like you wouldn't believe. This is great stuff. I remember watching some of this and reading about some of this stuff at the time when it was going on. I ended up working with a lot of the guys you've talked about, and just hearing some of the stuff. I know that when you guys went down and were able to win the titles, you guys were in a 4-way match, weren't you? In order to win the NWA titles.
It was a 4-way match, and one of the teams involved was Tully Blanchard and Tom Pritchard. And I remember telling Tony, they're not going to do this. I didn't believe it until it happened. I said, they're not going to do this. They're just trying to get us to show up. That's why they're telling us that we're going to win the belts. And it was a team called the Border Patrol, out of the Carolinas, and that Team Extreme from Texas. And sure enough, we it was NWA's 50th anniversary, and JR was sitting in the back scouting talent, and it was one of the most surreal moments from that show was watching Missy Hyatt stitch up some kid's forehead that got his head split open in the ring.
Wow. Now, Dr. Tom was a replacement too, wasn't he?
Yeah, I think he was a replacement, and Sheldon, correct me if I'm wrong, I think for Barry Windham.
Barry, I think.
That's correct.
If I'm not,
That is correct, yeah. Kevin, were you following NWA New England, Century Wrestling Alliance back in those years?
To a point. A lot of it was in the aftermags, reading the results. Because, again, it's pre-internet. You don't realize how close some of these matches are to you. And for some of the listeners out there, yes, there was a time before the internet. Just seeing the names over and over and over again, and then seeing them in the magazines. It's fascinating now to hear the stories. If I may just sort of grab the steering wheel and hook to the left a little bit to go into some of the other things that Knuckles has touched upon. You had mentioned addiction and depression. Was that going on while you were wrestling? Was it after wrestling? Was this something that had been like a long history? Just so that way if there's anybody out there that's going through some of the same things, maybe we can give them a little bit of inspiration to pull themselves out just like you did.
Sure. Well, a lot of people just assume that it was because of being involved in wrestling that led me down that path, but I was already full-blown alcoholic and drug addict before I ever stepped foot in a wrestling ring. It goes back to my late teens where I was having problems with this stuff. And, I grew up in the culture where people with a lot of drinking and marijuana use as teenagers and pills and other things. And and the wrestling business back then, it was very, it was a perfect place for me to go. It was, there was a lot of that. I'm not saying everyone was doing it. I'm just saying that I was, but there was a lot of partying going on in those days, and it carried on. The funny thing about it is it carried on all the way up until my last involvement in professional wrestling was late September 28th of 2002, and I was in my first AA meeting October 2nd of 2002. It was a matter of a couple of days that and when I got sober and I decided to stop doing all that stuff, I was done. I was totally done. And depression, anxiety, temper, rage, being dishonest, all that stuff goes hand in hand with it. I mean, I don't really gamble or smoke cigarettes, but if I did, I would have done that stuff in earnest too. I just but when I finally got sober, I never went back to that life again. And anyone that is struggling with addiction can find me easily online, and I'm open to talking to anyone about the path that I took. I covered extensively in my book on it's too long to go into right now, but there is a formula that I followed that was really helpful, and if anyone ever did need to talk about that, I would be more than willing to talk to anyone anytime.
That's great.
Yeah,
it is great.
One of the other things you mentioned too is that there's a possible movie to be made out of the book. So if you could cast yourself, what are you thinking?
Well,
in a perfect world,
it would have to be a wrestler.
Well, Brad Pitt's too old, so yeah, don't worry about that.
Well, Jimmy Valiant and I have talked about this a lot, and he's, Boogie's up there now in years, and when I told him about the whole idea, he said to me, if you're looking for someone to tell you that this can't happen, you're talking to the wrong person. And this is a kid from Tennessee that ended up headlining Madison Square Garden, so he believes anything is possible. The book is in the right hands of the right people, and it would have to be a wrestler. And he had expressed an interest in wanting Jeff Jarrett to play a younger version of him, and I said, he's too old now, Boogie. He's too old to play a young version of you. Maybe like Dolph Ziggler or something. But I have a very close friendship with a guy named Rusty Brown. He's the lead singer of a rock band called Electric Mary in Australia, and I've been over there. I've gone on tour with them. I've introduced them on stage in big cities, and they're the built-in soundtrack for the movie Electric Mary. They're not really big in the States, but they're very popular in Australia. And the whole thing, just like the book, is in my head. A screenplay, is being worked on, and that wouldn't be something that I would think there would be, things would have to fall into place. But we'll see what happens. I've been told by people that are much more knowledgeable about this than me that this is a really good story and it's very cinematic. That's the word that they use, cinematic, not me.
All right, well, we're going to get back to wrestling right now. We're going to take a look at our bonus match. We're going to take you back to November 30th, 2007. Quincy, Massachusetts is the location. Matt Spectro, managed by Ryan Matthews, takes on Nightmare Nick Steele. Let's take a look at that from Quincy, November 30th, 2007, and we'll talk about it on the other side. Spectro posing for his very few fans in there. His manager, Ryan Matthews, discussing something with Chris Norman.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I've just been told to announce that Matt Spectro is also the 2007 Fashion Plate of the Year.
Well, if he's the fashion plate, it must be Chinette.
Hey, I just want to say, I'm undefeated in New England.
What?
I'm the New England Patriots of professional wrestling. Except, I don't need a camera on the sideline to win.
I apologize, fans. This episode does not come with a shovel. As Spectro making numerous unsubstantiated claims. No truth in advertising there. And here comes the opposition from Matt Spectro. Nightmare Nick Steele. Nightmare Nick Steele making his debut at Quincy on this night. Nick Steele, a powerhouse, extremely well schooled in amateur wrestling, mixed martial arts, and particularly submission wrestling. Nightmare Nick Steele telling me earlier that he's out to make a statement here in NECW. Matt Spectro, of course, a former NECW Tag Team Champion, was one half of the Noise Boys. Spectro being managed now by the self-professed future superstar Ryan Matthews. Kind of a strange pairing there, but then again, so are the Noise Boys. The bell is sounded, and here we go, collar and elbow tie-up. And Nick Steele with a waist lock. Drops Spectro to the canvas, nice takedown. Floats over. Spectro up to his feet. Elbow to the side of the head. Over the top of Steele. Steele grabs him again in a waist lock. Drops Spectro face first to the canvas. Bridges over, 2 count by Steele. Matt Spectro a little bit frustrated here as another elbow to the side of the face, and Spectro pounds away. Spectro backing up Steele on the ropes. Big chop to Steele. And Steele retaliates. Slugfest here. Steele and Spectro going at it. Steele backing him up now. Knees to the midsection of Matt Spectro. Irish whip reverse, Steele off the ropes, ducks the clothesline, gets behind him. Oh, big suplex right there. Nice move by Nick Steele. Big knee, drops Matt Spectro straight to the canvas. And Nightmare Nick Steele showing some fire here. This week on NECW TV, Spectro now backing up Nick Steele. Big boot right to the face of the Nightmare. Spectro pounds away. Spectro does have a height advantage. Latent choke on the ropes. Stealing the ropes. Ryan Matthews getting a piece of this. Big chop by Steele. And another knee right to the midsection of Nick Steele, and that doubled him up. Spectro, full body slam on Steele. Cover right here, and only one. Ryan Matthews adding a little color commentary here. And now it's Steele. Forward roll right there. Oh, wait a minute, he's got a submission on him. He's got him locked up right there. And he taps out. Nightmare Nick Steele with a key lock, putting away Matt Spectro. Spectro in pain on the outside. Ryan Matthews says he's going to take care of business. Oh, wait a minute, not a good idea here. Same deal with Ryan Matthews. And it's Tap City. As Nightmare Nick Steele takes charge. this week on NECW TV. Coming up, we've got TJ Richter in action, Michael Sane, and DC Dillinger taking on Jason Blade in our TV main event. Much more to come here on NECW TV. Stay with us. So, Nick Steele had a very big role to play, Knuckles, in your life and career.
He did.
Yeah, he was a guy that I after watching this again and not seeing it for many years, he's a guy that I wish we had done a lot more with. I don't know what happened there. Maybe he had commitments to Top Rope and whatever, and just wasn't really available to us. But we were using a lot of guys out of that New Bedford area at the time, and I really didn't know Nick that well. My first encounter with him was him being booked for our shows, and what an athlete,
Well, Nick was there's so much I can say about him. The first thing I will say was there were two people when they passed away that shocked me the most in my entire life, and one was Tony Rumble, and it was equally with Nick, because Nick had 3 kids. He was a family man. He was a great guy, and he was a tremendous wrestler. I felt like he was born to be in the ring. I mean, when I wrestled him when I was breaking into wrestling, I was in my late 20s. I broke in really late. And this kid is suplexing me all over the ring, and he was 16 years old, and he could already bench press 400 pounds. And I would go to his house because they had a ring in their garage, and we would work out, and then we'd have these great heart-to-heart conversations. Like, he was really deep, and he was spiritual, and he was very honest kid. And then I'd walk in his bedroom, and I'd see wrestling posters on the wall, and I'd be like, holy shit, this guy's a kid. He's like, 16 years old, and I don't even think he was driving yet, but he understood tag team wrestling very, very well, and he understood wrestling very well. And, the match that we just watched was like, it was very emotional for me to watch that, because he was so young in that particular matchup there. But he was, to me, he was like a cross between Samoa Joe, Taz, and Jeff Cobb.
Perfect.
Very good description. Joe, you knew him pretty well.
I knew Nick real well. Yeah, I remember I worked with him before I joined NECW back in the Sparta days, and that's when I really got to know him. And he helped me along too. He was good when I was refereeing. If I ever refereed any of his matches, he made it so easy. He'd just say to me, he goes, "Joe, here's what we're doing." And he led me where I needed to be, and put me in the positions that I needed to be. Made it very, very simple for me to do. And then when I got to work with him in NECW, that was fantastic, because he was in it for a little while, tagging with Evan Six for a little bit, and then remember this match too. And then I got one more chance to see him, probably a year or so before he died, and he was still out. It's fantastic shape. And just the nicest guy. Man, he could pull things out of people. I remember him working with Alicia Edwards when she was with NECW, and he just knew how to talk to people when she was doing a promo. And he would get in there, and he'd shut the cameras off, and he'd look, and he'd just explain something, and made it it was so simplistic the way he put things, and she clicked. And she was getting it, and he was just a fantastic person, and very intoxicating to be around him, because he was just such a good guy. Well missed. That was a hard match to watch.
Kevin, you had to run into Nick.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, when I started with Yankee back in '99, and it was shortly after I got there that Nick actually came back to Yankee. And it's funny that Knuckles was saying, he was just a kid. When I met him, he was a grizzled vet. That's the way he was to me. And then the more you would talk to him, I didn't realize he was my age, or maybe even a little bit younger. But between the throws and the submissions and just the mind for the business, he was aged so much in the business as opposed to what his age actually was.
Wasn't his father a promoter?
Yes, his father's name was Frank Castahana. He bared a slight resemblance to Captain Lou Albano. He was a great guy. He was always outside the ring when we would have practices in Freetown, when they had the Coastal Pro Wrestling training facility there. They ran good shows. They had VFW hall type shows. But I remember Bob Evans saying to me, I don't know how they do it, because the places were always banged out and full to capacity, with one of those deals where the ring is too big for the room. They'd have a full-size ring, and and you couldn't do much off the top ropes, but there was always big crowds, and Frank was a great guy. I loved him. The whole family. I know the whole family. I know his widow, I guess is what you would call her now, Jennifer, and he's got 3 kids and had 3 kids, and it's like you said about Tony. It's just one of those things that. I could go, when we're done with the show later, I'll think of 10 stories. But right now, I'm just like, wow, he's gone. Still thinking that way.
Right. Yeah, hearing that news was a huge shock.
Oh yeah.
The night that he had, they had the memorial show for him in New Bedford at a, I can't think of the name of it. It was like a nightclub where they put the ring in the middle of it, and it was really cool. There were a lot of people there. But I was going to see him wrestle that night, and it ended up being a memorial show.
Yeah.
And, there were a lot of people showed up to that show because of that. I know I was there. Silvano Souza was there. Matt Taven was there. There was, so many others too. Like I hate when I start mentioning names and I left a few people out, but it was a very emotional night when all the wrestlers came out. Scott King was there, and guys that were there from the beginning. Someone like Scott and myself, we were there from day one. From when we all were training together and green as can be.
It's an interesting brotherhood that we have in pro wrestling, and that area is an interesting area. That South Coast area, they have such a legacy of wrestling going back, 30 years or so. Top Rope's been around 30 odd years, if you go back to when it was Yankee Pro.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
I had quite a few matches there in my early days. I remember Gino Caruso, Dr. D. David Schultz, Phil Apollo. These were all Tony Rumble. All had a hand in helping mold the wrestlers and teaching them the art of pro wrestling back there. It was they have been going strong for a really long time, even though the owners have changed hands and everything. But it's a long storied history, and when you talk about writing a book, that's the book in its own right.
Yeah, absolutely. Interesting. New England has an interesting history of independent wrestling, and they're a big part of it. Independent wrestling, when I met Tony, independent wrestling was a relatively new thing, as we know it now anyway. I mean, there have been independents in some way, shape, or form for many, many years, long before we were in the business, but independent wrestling as we know it now, that was a new thing back in the 90s. The territory's dying out, and independent wrestling was pretty much what took its place, but Tony Rumble was really a pioneer of that. And Top Rope, Joe Eugenio, guys like Frank, who had his own little company down there, that was, those were things that you didn't see in a lot of other parts of the country. In the territory days, if you weren't part of the main office that was on TV, you were considered an outlaw show, and they tried to shut you down.
Well, one of the things that I love about when you look at the highest level of wrestling in recent history, you look at Killer Kowalski's students and where some of them are, and you have Triple H, obviously, where he has been for years, and you have Matt Bloom training at the Performance Center. It's like the New England hand is in the soup there. I mean, these guys are like running everything, and it's Matt started with us.
Right.
That's pretty cool when you think about it. Like, the Kowalski way is definitely being taught down there.
You got guys like Eddie Edwards, who's over in Impact, and he's a Kowalski guy. You got who just wrestled the other night,
Frankie Kazarian.
Mm-hmm. There's another one. There's 3 different promotions with top guys that all came out of the same school. That's huge.
For itself. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It does.
And a lot has changed since Walter's gone now. I think the guys coming up now that don't have that influence, while some of the guys that Walter did train who are still around and are working at a top level, I mean, they're still blazing a trail. But now, around here, it's like the guys are making it up on the fly. That Kowalski influence isn't as felt anymore because we've passed a couple of generations now of guys coming up that were influenced by him or trained by him. and I think the business is poorer for it. I wanted to ask you, Knuckles, about what you're watching today. Do you watch much wrestling these days, and if so, what?
Yeah, I feel the best analogy of the COVID era wrestling was made by you, where watching wrestling without a crowd is like taking a shower without water. But I've definitely enjoyed AEW. I enjoy Ring of Honor still. I can totally get lost on YouTube just watching whatever wormhole I end up going down. I'll still look at WWE. Like I had a period of time where I really wasn't paying attention to the wrestling world anymore, but my batteries got recharged, especially after when we all got together at Tony's Memorial Show, and that really that was a big part of it. And getting to see you again and getting to see all the guys, and everyone in Tony's family. I would say if you said, if you were saying, just give me one promotion that you're going to watch, I would say probably AEW.
Okay, fair enough. Well, your book is called Waking Up, From the Wrestling Ring to the Yoga Mat. You can get it at Amazon and pretty much any place where you buy books. Am I correct?
Yes. It's available. Amazon's the best shot, though. Best place to get it.
All right. Well, make sure you get a copy. It's an inspiration. You're an inspiration, my friend. Thank you for joining us this week. It's good to hear your voice. It's good to see your face, although the people watching or listening to this can't see your face. We can see your face. We'll put up a picture of you just so others can see your face. Anyway, thanks again for being with us. Folks, thank you for joining us. For Joe Matarazzo, Kevin Castro, Sheldon Goldberg, thanks again, and we'll catch you next week.
The ReGeneration Podcast is a production of New England Championship Wrestling. To send us questions, comments, or feedback, email us at regenerationnecw@gmail.com.